Well, there's no better way to kick off our preview podcast right here in town with a long running rivalry between Iowa City High and Iowa City West. This game will kick off 7 p.m. Friday night, October 23rd at West High. West High with the bye. City High coming off of the 41-16 victory against Ottumwa that we spoke about during Monday's podcast. If anybody wants to go back and hear a review of that, but we're gonna look ahead here, Ryan. These two teams met earlier in the season. West High winning convincingly, 56-20. Just kind of your overview thoughts on this game before we dig in a little bit more.
I told you on Monday when we talked that I was really excited to go back and just kind of dig into the first game a little bit and then what the teams have done since. And I did a lot of that. Not that it has any bearing on what happens on Friday, but I think there's a chance for this game to play out a lot differently than the first game, Rob. As I've mentioned several times, I think it's kind of been the story for City, especially in that 3-game losing streak where they weren't far off from winning some of those games. But ultimately, this West High team, we've mentioned it. I just think that they've taken it to another level this year. Even, and maybe they saw it. It'd be interesting to talk to their coaches about this at some point. But maybe more than what I thought. At the start of the year, like we talked early, I definitely thought they'd be very good, but they are playing at an extremely high level. If you're looking at the eastern side of the state right now, power rankings, best resume, whatever you want to call it, it's them in Dubuque Hempstead. And we'll get into Hempstead in a little bit, obviously, but they've beaten good teams. I'm talking about West High. I mean, they've beaten, the last 2 games, 2 really good programs, Dubuque Senior and Kennedy. They've looked really good. They're playing at a super high level, led by Marcus Morgan. But I think this game's going to be a little bit different, and we can get into that a little bit more, I guess. But again, anytime these two teams play, it's cliched. I know it. I know that. Anytime these two teams play, you saw it last year. I didn't anticipate, that 2019 game in the regular season finale being a 4-point game. I don't think anybody did. Anytime these two teams play, you just don't know exactly what's going to happen. City High is going to be ready to play this game. There's no question about that. So you kind of throw the records out the window, but at the same time, West is a really, really good team. And I don't think anybody's going to argue that.
I will throw this out there for folks that are listening and may not have looked yet. And obviously this is subject to change. Weather on Friday evening at 7 p.m. is predicted to be 40 degrees with an 11-mile-an-hour wind. 8 o'clock, it will be 38. 9 o'clock, it will be 37. So football weather doesn't look like there's any precipitation in the forecast as of now. So we should get a true game here without any of that silliness with weather being involved.
I will say one thing, and maybe, this is what we do. And I say we, sports writers, people all over, sports, pundits, whatever you want to call us. We analyze things that maybe sometimes don't need analyzed. I meant to mention this to you last week at the game. I feel like last week was that first really pretty cold game of the year, Rob, where it felt different. That when you walk out and you're like, oh, wow, this feels different now. We had some chilly nights, but last week felt a little bit different. And I think our game had like 6 fumbles, and so that's maybe a thing where City High played last week. West didn't. Now, obviously, I saw pictures of them. They practiced in the snow on Monday. They obviously practiced last week. But that's something to watch for just a little bit when the action's going and you're catching passes and you're carrying the ball and it's just the ball's a little bit harder and slicker, on those really cold nights when it feels like it's frozen. So something to keep an eye on a little bit. Hanging on to the football. Everybody talks about it in the postseason, but it's going to be kind of chilly. So just a quick weather note for you, Rob.
Yes, bundle up. Be ready for the elements. So statistically, Ryan, obviously City High is an extra game. So overall, the overall numbers are going to be a little bit skewed for City High But if you look at it just from a, yards per completion, yards per rush, City High appears to be a team that's a little bit more reliant on running the football, 1,120 yards on the ground, 5.1 per carry, whereas they are 697 through the air, 14.8 per completion. Conversely, West High, 1,053 yards through the air, 18.2 per completion, 594 on the ground, 5.4 yards per carry. So how do you see that shaking out? Does that an impact on, stylistic point of this game? Would City High prefer this to be a game where it can control the clock with its running game?
City needs to play this game in the 20s.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that absolutely. Now, no one's been able to do that to West this year. So easier said than done, right? I think they had 28 offensive points against Dubuque Senior, and then Marcus Morgan returned to interception for the final touchdown. They won that game. They scored 35 in that game. But otherwise, you look at West game, they scored 27 against Liberty in the opening game. I take that back. So, but that's the way that City High needs to play this game. Absolutely. Their last 3 games, they've scored 56, 35, 48 points. So they need to play this game in the 20s. And like I told you, I was interested to go back and look at the game. And this is I wrote down a couple keys for all these games. And my first key for City High is long possessions, Rob. I mean, you look at that first game, West High returned the opening kickoff, Graham Goring with just an incredible return, 99 yards. And so they're up 7-0. Like, I don't know, Graham's fast. I don't know what he runs 100 in 12 seconds. I mean, so they're 15 seconds into the game, they're up 7-0. Even with that happening, with under 9 minutes left in the first half, Rob, that first game was 14-7. So it's 14-7 with under 9 minutes to play in the second quarter. And West gets 28 points. I think 28 or 21. I didn't write that back, but they still managed to basically decide the game in the final 9 minutes of the second quarter. That's how explosive their offense is. That's how good their offense is. But if you look at the first 4 drives for City High in that game, first drive lasted 2 minutes. They got 1 first down and punted. Their second drive was 8+ minutes, 16 plays, 68-yard touchdown drive. And that's how they put themselves in that situation, even with a kickoff return, to be in the game, 15 minutes into the game with 9 minutes left in the second quarter. Their last 2 drives of that half, Rob, a 3-and-out that lasted 66 seconds in a drive where they had 1 first down and punted that lasted about 2.5 minutes. If you do that and you run off 3 minutes combined 3 minutes on 2 possessions and then give the ball back to West, you're asking for trouble. I mean, you don't have to score on every drive because their defense is really good, and you're not going to score every time you get the ball. We talked about this a little bit with the game we were at last week, just kind of running that clock down and how Marion manipulated that. They need to run the play clock down. I mean, they got to shorten the game. I'm not taking anything away from City High and their players and their kids, but they're the underdog, right? You want to shorten the game, you want to run the clock, and you need to do what you do best, which is run the ball, run your 240-pound senior quarterback between the tackles, get 4 yards, stay ahead of the chains, put yourself in second and manageable, third and manageable, pick up first downs, and even if you're getting 2 or 3 first downs every time, and giving the ball back, punting the ball back, whatever, you're going to give yourselves a chance to shorten the game. You want to get to halftime within striking distance. City High has some kids that can make plays. You get the game. I mean, I really think when you've lost the first time 56-20, that's the number one thing. You get to the second half, within striking distance. And to do that, you got to have long possessions. That's what I took out of that first game when I went back and looked at it was, you're sitting there with 9 minutes left in the first half, and you're like, okay, it's 14-7 with a kickoff return in there. And then Marcus Morgan just did his thing. So you saw both things that make this game so interesting to me is City High can run the ball, and then Marcus Morgan can be the best player in the state. So my key for West, no rust. Can't control that. They've dealt with not playing before. They have the 3-week layoff. I'm not overly concerned about that, but if you have some rust, kick it off early. And then my other two keys for City High, Rob, their offense is too good that you're not gonna make mistakes. You're not gonna let a guy, get outside. Marcus Morgan isn't gonna not complete passes. You're not gonna shut them down. You're not gonna hold them to, 180 yards or 200 yards in 2 touchdowns. Don't make your mistakes turn into touchdowns. Can you give up a big play that's 50 yards and then make them go the final 20, make them earn the final 20? You can't give up those huge plays, those giant chunk plays that turn into touchdowns. And that's really hard to do because you saw it against Kennedy. West has done that against every team they've played. But you can't give up those big plays that turn into touchdowns. And then for West, spread it around. I mean, they have 5 receivers with more than 100 yards. They have a really good running back in Trey King. Don't let this game, if this game stays close, don't let this be a game where, you put everything on Marcus Morgan's shoulders. And I think that's where the West High coaching staff has done a really good job this year. You've got a guy that's an incredible player that's playing at an incredibly high level, but you see it last week. First play of the game, he makes a nice throw, and he's done a really good job of getting the ball into the hands of his playmakers and then just telling those guys, because they've got other playmakers. You've seen it. Graham Goring, Demarion Williams. They've got guys, Trey King. They've got a lot of guys. Eric Torres. They've got guys that can make plays. Let those guys have the ball and be really good playmakers. And I think that's what Marcus has done really well. So that's kind of what I'm looking at in this game. City High's got to shorten it, and West has got to take care of the ball and let their quarterback do his thing and spread the ball around. One thing I wanted to bring up, because I was curious about this, Rob. We've talked a lot about how good Marcus Morgan's been this year. I multiplied his stats out over a 9-game season just because I was kind of curious. So he's averaging 263 passing yards a game, which if they play a regular 9-game season is right around 2,400 yards, which is obviously really good. I think he's just over 1,000 yards in 4 games. But he's thrown 14 touchdowns and 1 interception. So if you multiply that out over a 9-game season, he'd have 32 touchdowns, which is obviously really impressive. I mean, he's averaging 3.5 touchdown passes a game. So really, really, you can't talk about them and not touch on the fact of just how good he's been this year.
Yeah, and that's really the key, Ryan. Just to throw another stat out here before we move on to our next game. West High's won 4 in a row in this series, scoring 52, 54, 36, and 56.
Right.
And right to your point, City High can't be up there. City High can't let this game get into a track meet. From what I've seen this year, I don't think it can win that way.
And the 2019 game, just so we're not confusing with the first game this year, right, was 36-32. So they played in that type of a game a little bit. This is a different West High team, even than last year. And again, not taking anything away from City, but this is a different West High team. They can play defense, and they have. We've talked about how their defense is overlooked and how good I think they've been, especially in the front 7 on defense. And again, not to take anything away from their back end, but they're more physical than what you think. They're good up front. But look, if you come out and you want to say, hey, we're going to play a track meet with you and we want to, go up tempo, and somebody comes out, and whoever that may be, I'm not saying they're going to beat any team in the state. Like we talked about an Ankeny matchup or some of these teams, but West isn't going to sit over there and shy away from that.
No.
I mean, they've got the athletes all over. And I've seen them a couple times go 2-minute offense. They're so good at that. They can beat you that way too. And that's you said it well, that's the last thing that City wants to do is try to run up and down the field with them.